Darkness has always invited imagination. In the quiet hours of night, when silence feels heavy and every shadow seems to hold secrets, you might find yourself wondering not about the stars above, but about what lies beneath your feet. Beyond the basement foundation you poured 20 years ago, past the water table you've mapped for municipal projects, deeper than any excavation you've supervised in your decades of construction work. You've spent your career understanding Earth. The soil composition reports, the geological surveys, the careful calculations of load-bearing capacity. You know how bedrock feels under a drill bit, how clay shifts in different seasons, how groundwater moves through limestone. But tonight, as you settle into your favorite chair with the day's stress finally lifting from your shoulders, consider this unsettling possibility. What if everything you thought you knew about the planet beneath you was incomplete? Some say there's nothing down there but stone and molten iron, the standard geological model you learned in engineering school. The same model that's guided every foundation you've ever designed, every tunnel you've helped bore through hillsides for highway projects. But others whisper that entire kingdoms may thrive in secret beneath us, civilizations that have watched our surface world with patient eyes while we remain oblivious to their existence. The story begins with an idea that seems absurd at first glance: the hollow Earth. In your engineering training, you learned that Earth is solid, layered like an onion with distinct zones: crust, mantle, outer core, inner core. These divisions are supported by seismic readings, by the mathematics of gravity, by countless experiments in geology. The science you've relied on throughout your professional life. Yet, despite centuries of scientific certainty, there remains a sliver of doubt, sharpened by discoveries too persistent to ignore and experiences too strange to explain away. Think about your own career for a moment. How many times have you encountered unexpected voids during excavation? That shopping mall project in '98, where the backhoe broke through into a natural cavern nobody knew existed. The highway expansion, where ground-penetrating radar showed solid rock, but the drill found hollow spaces that stretched beyond your equipment's range. Each time, you filed reports, adjusted plans, and moved forward. But the questions lingered. Now multiply that uncertainty by the scale of a planet. If experienced contractors like yourself regularly encounter the unexpected in small-scale projects, what might remain undiscovered in the vast depths beneath our feet? What if those isolated incidents weren't anomalies, but glimpses of something much larger? The notion of hollow Earth isn't just the province of conspiracy theorists and science fiction writers. It has roots in military strategic thinking, in corporate resource assessment, in the kind of practical planning you understand from your own project management experience. During the Cold War, when you were perhaps just starting your apprenticeship in the trades, Pentagon planners took underground facilities seriously, deadly seriously. You remember the news reports about Cheyenne Mountain, the NORAD facility carved into solid granite in Colorado. 2,000 tons of steel and concrete, suspended on massive springs to absorb nuclear blasts. An underground city built to survive anything the surface world could throw at it. But that was just the beginning of what military engineers accomplished beneath the Earth. The network of deep underground military bases, DUMBs, as they're known in classified circles, represents perhaps the most extensive underground construction project in human history. Facilities connected by tunnel systems that span hundreds of miles, transportation networks that move personnel and equipment through pathways carved from solid rock, environmental control systems that maintain livable conditions thousands of feet below the surface. If modern militaries could carve cities from solid rock in mere decades, working with contemporary technology and limited budgets, what might civilizations with millennia of time and accumulated knowledge have accomplished? What if the engineering challenges you face on your largest projects, structural support, ventilation, water management, power distribution, were solved long ago by others working far beneath the reach of surface world observation? General Curtis LeMay once remarked, during a classified briefing that didn't become public knowledge until decades later, that the deepest military installations were barely scratching the surface of what's possible down there. Coming from a man who oversaw the Strategic Air Command and understood the scope of American military capability, such a statement carries weight. It suggests knowledge of underground potential that extends far beyond conventional military planning. As you sit in the growing darkness of evening, feeling the familiar weight of your house settling around you, consider that the solid ground beneath your feet might be far more complex than any blueprint you've ever studied. Defense contractors at Lockheed Martin and Boeing maintain entire divisions dedicated to underground construction technology. Their patent filings, buried in technical documents that few civilians ever examine, reveal tunnel-boring machines that dwarf anything used in civilian projects. Equipment capable of carving passages through solid granite at speeds that would have seemed impossible just decades ago. Environmental control systems designed for sealed underground facilities that could operate independently for years. You understand the economics of large-scale construction. Every project requires careful cost-benefit analysis, detailed feasibility studies, and precise resource allocation. When corporations file patents for underground construction, technology, equipment that costs hundreds of millions to develop, they're not doing so on speculation. They're responding to contracts, to demonstrated need, to markets that already exist. The question becomes, what markets justify such massive investment in subterranean capability? But the mystery extends far beyond modern military-industrial planning. Ancient civilizations, working with primitive tools and manual labor, achieved underground construction that challenges our contemporary understanding of what's possible. Consider the engineering marvel beneath Cappadocia in Turkey. Not a single facility, but an interconnected network of underground cities carved from volcanic rock. The largest, Derinkuyu, could house 20,000 people across multiple levels, complete with ventilation systems, water storage, stables for livestock, and defensive features that suggest long-term habitation rather than temporary refuge. The precision of these ancient excavations rivals modern engineering standards. Ventilation shafts that extend hundreds of feet down through solid rock, maintaining air circulation throughout the complex. Water systems that tap into underground sources and distribute fresh water to every level. Structural supports that have maintained integrity for over 2,000 years. When you examine the technical specifications, applying your own experience with foundation engineering and structural design, the sophistication becomes unmistakable. These weren't hasty emergency shelters. The planning, excavation, and construction would have required generations of sustained effort. Entire communities dedicated to expanding and perfecting underground living spaces. But here's what makes you pause as an experienced contractor. The Cappadocian sites show evidence of continuous improvement over centuries. Each generation added new features, refined existing systems, expanded capacity. Now consider this pattern repeated across cultures that had no contact with each other. In Malta, the Hal Saflieni High Podium represents 3 levels of precisely carved underground chambers, complete with acoustic features that amplify sound in ways modern engineers are still studying. The construction techniques, the understanding of geology required, the sheer scope of manual excavation, all accomplished over 4,000 years ago. Among the Hopi people of the American Southwest, oral traditions preserve detailed accounts of the ant people, subterranean beings who sheltered humanity during catastrophic times of fire and flood. But these aren't vague mythological references. The stories include specific details about underground living, food storage techniques, water management, ventilation systems, social organization during extended isolation. The kind of practical knowledge that emerges from actual experience, not imagination. Corporate geologists working on mining projects in the Southwest have learned to take indigenous oral traditions seriously. Too often, stories dismissed as folklore turn out to contain accurate information about geological features, mineral deposits, and underground water sources. Mining executives at companies like Freeport-McMoRan now routinely consult tribal knowledge when planning deep excavation projects. The success rate of these collaborations has convinced even skeptical engineers that traditional accounts often preserve real information. The Hopi descriptions of their subterranean helpers include details that resonate with anyone who's worked on underground construction projects, large spaces requiring artificial lighting, complex air circulation systems to prevent carbon dioxide buildup, food preservation techniques for extended isolation, water management in environments where surface sources aren't available, social protocols for maintaining order when large groups live in confined spaces for extended periods. These aren't the kinds of details that emerge from pure imagination. They reflect understanding of the practical challenges involved in underground living. Challenges that modern military planners and corporate engineers spend millions of dollars to solve. The Hopi accounts suggest that such solutions were developed and refined over generations of actual experience. As you consider these convergent patterns, modern military capability, ancient engineering achievements, indigenous technical knowledge, a picture begins to emerge. Not of isolated historical curiosities, but of a consistent human adaptation to underground environments, a progression of technical development that spans millennia and continues into the present day. The question that emerges from this convergence isn't whether humans can live underground, but whether some already do. In 1947, Admiral Richard E. Byrd led Operation High Jump, the largest Antarctic expedition in American history. As someone who's managed complex projects involving multiple contractors, extensive equipment coordination, and precise logistical planning, you can appreciate the scale of this undertaking. Over 4,700 personnel, 13 ships, 33 aircraft, and resources that would cost hundreds of millions in today's dollars, all deployed to what was officially described as a training exercise in polar conditions. Your experience with government contracts tells you something important about such massive deployments. Federal agencies, particularly military organizations, don't authorize expeditions of this magnitude without compelling strategic justification. The paperwork alone for moving nearly 5,000 personnel and a fleet of ships to Antarctica would require months of planning, multiple levels of approval, and detailed mission objectives that go far beyond simple training exercises. The official records state that Operation High Jump was designed to test equipment and personnel in extreme cold weather conditions, establishing research stations and improving American capability in polar environments. But when you examine the operational details through the lens of project management experience, inconsistencies emerge. The expeditionary force included heavy construction equipment, deep drilling apparatus, and specialized excavation tools, equipment that seems excessive for surface-level research stations. Admiral Byrd himself, in interviews following the expedition, made statements that suggest the mission accomplished more than routine polar research. He spoke of Antarctica as the land of everlasting mystery, describing the continent as holding resources that could supply the world. For a senior naval officer with decades of exploration experience, such language carries weight. Byrd wasn't prone to exaggeration or speculative commentary. His reports typically focused on concrete observations and measurable results. The expedition ended prematurely after just 8 weeks, rather than the planned 8 months. Official explanations cite harsh weather conditions and equipment failures, but crew members who participated in the operation later provided accounts that suggest more complex reasons for the early termination. Some described encounters with phenomena that didn't match their extensive polar training. Others mentioned discoveries that were immediately classified and removed from their mission reports. What makes these accounts particularly intriguing is their consistency with patterns you recognize from your own experience with large-scale construction projects. When unexpected discoveries occur during excavation, archaeological finds, geological anomalies, structural complications, the immediate response is to halt operations, secure the site, and bring in specialists for assessment. Projects that seemed straightforward suddenly become complex, requiring new expertise and different resources. Intelligence analysts who've examined the Operation High Jump records note similar patterns. Equipment requisitions that don't match stated objectives. Personnel assignments that include specialists in fields not typically associated with polar research. Communication protocols that suggest the expedition encountered situations requiring immediate consultation with Washington. The operational signatures of a mission that discovered something unexpected. The broader context of 1947 adds additional layers to consider. This was the beginning of the Cold War, when both American and Soviet forces were actively seeking strategic advantages. The development of nuclear weapons had changed military thinking about underground facilities, making deep shelter capabilities a national security priority. Any discovery of extensive natural underground systems would have immediate strategic implications. But the polar connection to underground civilizations extends beyond single expeditions. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, both superpowers maintained extensive research programs in Antarctica, investing resources that seemed disproportionate to the continent's apparent strategic value. The Antarctic Treaty of 1959, which dedicated the continent to peaceful scientific research, represents an unusual example of international cooperation during the height of Cold War tensions. Consider the strategic implications from a project manager's perspective. When competing organizations suddenly agree to restrict access to a resource-rich region, it typically indicates one of 2 scenarios. Either the resources are more limited than initially assessed, or they require careful management due to their sensitive nature. Antarctica contains vast mineral deposits, fresh water reserves, and potential energy resources that would normally attract intensive development competition. The fact that 12 nations, including the United States and Soviet Union, agreed so readily to limit Antarctic activities suggests that something about the continent required special consideration. Perhaps the discovery of features that made unrestricted development problematic. Perhaps the identification of conditions that made international oversight necessary. Defense contractors who worked on Cold War underground construction projects describe briefings about polar considerations that went beyond standard environmental challenges. References to structural features that required specialized engineering approaches. Geological conditions that offered both opportunities and complications for deep facility construction. The convergence of evidence from this era points toward discoveries that significantly influenced strategic planning, discoveries that remain classified decades later. The Kola Super Deep Borehole Project, initiated by Soviet scientists in 1970, represents the deepest artificial penetration into Earth's crust ever achieved. Reaching over 12 kilometers into the Kola Peninsula, this drilling operation was officially designed to study the deep continental crust and test the feasibility of extremely deep drilling technology. But the project's classified reports, declassified only decades later, reveal discoveries that challenged fundamental assumptions about what exists beneath our feet. As an engineer who's overseen drilling operations for foundation work and geothermal installations, you understand the technical challenges involved in deep excavation. Maintaining bore stability at extreme depths, managing equipment in high-temperature, high-pressure environments, dealing with unexpected geological formations that can destroy expensive drilling apparatus. The deeper you go, the more complex and costly the operation becomes. Yet the Soviets continued the Kola project for over 2 decades, investing resources that would cost billions in contemporary terms. The official scientific findings from Kola included unexpected temperature readings, temperatures nearly twice as high as predicted geological models suggested possible. Microscopic plankton fossils at depths where no biological material should exist according to conventional understanding. But the most intriguing discoveries appear in technical reports that weren't released to the international scientific community for years after the project's completion. Drilling technicians reported encountering void spaces at various depths, cavities that seemed too large and too regular to be natural geological formations. Acoustic measurements revealed echo patterns suggesting extensive hollow areas beyond the reach of drilling equipment. At several points, the drill bit broke through into spaces large enough to accommodate the drilling apparatus itself, spaces that existed where solid rock should have been present according to seismic surveys. These anomalies weren't isolated incidents. Similar patterns have emerged from deep drilling projects around the world. The German Continental Deep Drilling Program encountered unexpected cavities in Bavarian granite formations. Corporate mining operations in South Africa and Canada regularly report drill breakthrough into unmapped underground spaces. Each incident is typically filed as a geological anomaly, investigated briefly, then classified under proprietary research restrictions. Corporate executives at major mining companies have learned to budget for these contingencies. Exploration managers at companies like Rio Tinto and BHP Billiton include provisions for subsurface structural anomalies in their deep drilling contracts. The language is deliberately vague, but the financial allocations are substantial, suggesting that encountering large underground voids has become a routine consideration in deep excavation planning. The pattern extends beyond drilling operations into seismic monitoring. Since the 1960s, when nuclear test detection networks created unprecedented sensitivity to underground vibrations, monitoring stations have recorded acoustic anomalies that don't match standard geological models. Rhythmic vibrations from depths where no known natural processes should generate regular patterns. Resonance frequencies that suggest vast underground chambers responding to seismic waves like enormous drums. The New Madrid earthquakes of 1811 to 1812 remain one of the most dramatic examples of underground anomalies affecting surface conditions. The seismic events were powerful enough to ring church bells in Boston, over 1,000 miles away. The Mississippi River temporarily flowed backward. Witnesses reported fountains of sand and water erupting from the ground across hundreds of square miles, as if massive underground reservoirs had suddenly shifted and breached the surface. Modern seismologists explain these phenomena as liquefaction effects, soil and sand behaving like liquid under extreme vibrational stress. But the scale and duration of the New Madrid events suggest something beyond standard liquefaction. Geophysical analysis indicates that underground water systems across the entire Mississippi Valley underwent massive redistribution during the earthquakes. Water sources that had flowed for generations suddenly went dry, while new springs appeared in locations with no previous water activity. CIA geological survey teams, working in conjunction with the National Security Agency's seismic monitoring networks, have documented similar patterns in other regions. rhythmic underground vibrations that don't correlate with tectonic activity. Acoustic signatures suggesting large-scale underground water movement unrelated to surface weather patterns. Electromagnetic anomalies that indicate subsurface electrical activity where none should exist according to conventional geological understanding. These monitoring capabilities, developed during the Cold War for nuclear test detection, have created unprecedented insight into underground activities. Equipment sensitive enough to detect underground nuclear explosions anywhere on Earth inevitably picks up other subsurface phenomena. Much of this data remains classified, but declassified reports from the 1970s and 1980s reveal consistent patterns of unexplained underground activity. The question that emerges from decades of deep drilling and seismic monitoring isn't whether large underground spaces exist. The evidence for that is overwhelming. The question is whether these spaces show signs of organization, of artificial modification, of ongoing activity that suggests something more than natural geological processes. The technology to sustain advanced underground civilizations already exists, proven by installations you might have helped design or maintain throughout your career. Geothermal energy systems tap directly into Earth's internal heat, providing virtually unlimited power for facilities that know how to harness it effectively. Iceland generates over 90% of its heating and hot water from geothermal sources. The Philippines powers entire metropolitan regions from underground steam. If surface civilizations achieved this capability only in recent decades, imagine what societies with millennia of development time might have accomplished. Corporate research divisions at companies like General Electric and Mitsubishi have studied extremophile organisms, microbes that thrive in conditions previously thought uninhabitable. These research programs, initially funded for industrial applications like oil recovery and waste processing, have revealed biological systems that operate in environments more extreme than anything on Earth's surface. Organisms that survive in superheated water around volcanic vents. Bacteria that metabolize sulfur compounds in complete darkness. Entire ecosystems that derive energy from chemical reactions rather than sunlight. In 2018, scientists announced the discovery of deep life, microbial communities living as far as 5 kilometers below Earth's surface, potentially representing the majority of life on our planet. These organisms exist in environments with crushing pressure, extreme heat, and no access to surface-based energy sources. They've developed metabolic processes that convert minerals and gases into usable energy, creating self-sustaining biological systems in conditions that would instantly kill surface-dwelling life forms. The implications for underground habitability are profound. If microbes can establish thriving communities at such depths, the biological foundations for more complex ecosystems become theoretically possible. Hydrothermal vents on ocean floors already demonstrate this principle at work. Complex food webs built around chemosynthesis rather than photosynthesis, supporting everything from bacteria to large marine animals in environments of perpetual darkness. Your background in environmental systems gives you perspective on the engineering requirements for large-scale underground habitation. Climate control in sealed environments, water filtration and recycling systems, air circulation and atmospheric management, food production in artificial environments. These are challenges that modern underground facilities, from submarine bases to space stations, have successfully addressed using contemporary technology. The scale difference between current military installations and hypothetical ancient underground civilizations comes down to time and accumulated knowledge. Cheyenne Mountain represents what modern engineers can accomplish in a few years with massive resources. But consider what continuous development over centuries or millennia might achieve. each generation building upon previous improvements, refining systems, expanding capabilities, solving problems that would challenge contemporary engineers. Geothermal energy provides the crucial foundation for such long-term underground development. Unlike surface energy sources that depend on weather, seasons, or fuel supplies, geothermal systems tap into planetary energy reserves that operate on geological timescales. The heat differential between Earth's surface and interior represents an essentially inexhaustible power source for civilizations that develop the technology to access it efficiently. Underground water systems add another layer of sustainability. The mantle water discovery announced in 2014 revealed reservoirs potentially 3 times larger than all surface oceans combined, locked within mineral structures deep in Earth's interior. While not directly accessible as liquid water, these findings demonstrate that vast water resources exist at depths previously thought to be completely dry. Advanced civilizations with sufficient time and technology might develop methods to access and utilize these deep water reserves. Corporate mining operations regularly encounter underground water systems that don't appear on any surface survey. Aquifers that extend far beyond mapped boundaries. Springs that emerge from depths where geological models predict no water sources should exist. Water quality that indicates circulation through mineral systems over extended periods, suggesting complex underground flow patterns that connect distant regions. The agricultural implications become clearer when you consider hydroponic and aeroponic growing systems that major agricultural corporations have developed for controlled environments. Vertical farming installations that produce food crops without soil, using mineral solutions and artificial lighting. These systems, originally developed for urban agriculture and space exploration applications, prove that large populations can be fed using underground growing facilities with appropriate energy and water resources. Mining engineers who've worked on deep extraction projects describe encountering air circulation patterns that suggest natural ventilation systems operating at significant depths. Temperature gradients that indicate heat exchange between different underground regions. Acoustic properties that suggest vast open spaces connected by passages too extensive to map using conventional surveying techniques. Each observation adds to a picture of underground environments that are far more complex and potentially habitable than surface-based assumptions would suggest. The convergence of these factors, unlimited geothermal energy, extensive water resources, proven biological systems, and natural ventilation networks, creates conditions that could theoretically support not just survival, but sophisticated technological civilizations operating entirely below surface detection. The pattern of corporate secrecy around underground discoveries follows predictable business logic that you recognize from your own experience with proprietary technology and competitive advantages. When mining companies encounter significant anomalies during deep excavation, whether geological formations, mineral deposits, or structural features, the immediate response involves classification under trade secret protections. Information that could provide strategic advantage to competitors gets buried in proprietary research divisions, accessible only to personnel with specific clearance levels. Freeport-McMoRan executives have testified before congressional committees about subsurface resource anomalies that require specialized assessment before development can proceed. The language is carefully neutral, but the financial implications are substantial. When corporations delay profitable extraction projects for additional geological analysis, it typically indicates discoveries that don't fit standard development models. Features that require new approaches, new technology, or new partnerships with government agencies. Patent filings from defense contractors reveal steady advancement in underground construction capabilities that go far beyond civilian applications. Tunnel boring machines with specifications that exceed any known civilian infrastructure project. Environmental control systems designed for sealed facilities operating at depths where surface communication becomes impossible. Transportation networks that could move personnel and equipment through passages extending hundreds of miles underground. These aren't speculative research projects. Patent applications require detailed technical specifications, operational testing data, and demonstrated feasibility. The investment in research and development represented by these filings indicates established markets for underground construction technology. Contracts that justify the expense of developing equipment that costs more than most municipal infrastructure budgets. Boeing's Phantom Works division, responsible for classified aerospace projects, maintains entire engineering teams dedicated to subsurface applications. Personnel with security clearances that restrict their ability to discuss their work even within the company. Project funding that appears in quarterly reports under generic categories like advanced materials research or environmental systems development. The organizational structure mirrors other classified military contractor operations, suggesting similar levels of government oversight and strategic importance. Government classification patterns around geological discoveries follow procedures you'd recognize from other sensitive resource management issues. When federal surveys identify features that could affect national security, whether uranium deposits, strategic mineral reserves, or geological instabilities, the information gets classified under various levels of restricted access. The Atomic Energy Commission, Department of Interior, and Defense Department maintain parallel classification systems that can keep geological data secret for decades. Declassified documents from the 1970s reveal that military geologists regularly encountered structural anomalies during underground facility construction. Spaces that weren't predicted by surface surveys. Acoustic properties that suggested vast chambers beyond the reach of standard exploration. Temperature and air pressure readings that indicated complex underground circulation systems. Each discovery triggered additional investigation and higher levels of classification. The economic implications of underground space discovery create obvious incentives for secrecy. Property rights law becomes murky when dealing with vast underground features that extend beyond surface ownership boundaries. Resource extraction rights, environmental protection regulations, and international boundary disputes all become exponentially more complex when applied to three-dimensional underground territories. Corporate legal teams prefer to avoid such complications by limiting disclosure of underground discoveries. Intelligence community involvement in geological surveys adds another layer of classification. CIA geological analysis teams, established during the Cold War to assess Soviet mining capabilities, developed expertise in evaluating underground strategic resources. NSA seismic monitoring networks, originally designed for nuclear test detection, accumulated vast databases of underground acoustic signatures. Both agencies maintain ongoing interests in geological intelligence that extends far beyond their original national security mandates. Former Pentagon officials, speaking under conditions of anonymity after retirement, describe briefings about subterranean strategic considerations that went beyond standard facility planning. Scenarios involving long-term underground operations that required complete independence from surface support systems. Resource management strategies for underground facilities designed to operate for extended periods without surface contact. The implications suggest planning for scenarios where surface world conditions might make underground facilities the primary operational environment. Corporate merger and acquisition activity in the underground construction sector follows patterns that suggest coordinated strategic planning. Defense contractors acquiring mining companies, aerospace manufacturers purchasing drilling equipment specialists, energy companies developing partnerships with military engineering firms. The consolidation creates integrated capabilities for underground development that would have been impossible for individual companies to achieve independently. International cooperation agreements around underground research mirror the Antarctic Treaty Model, restricting access and development while maintaining scientific research exemptions. These agreements typically emerge when discoveries require management beyond the capabilities of individual nations or corporations, resources that affect multiple countries, or features that present challenges requiring coordinated international response. The convergence of corporate secrecy, government classification, and international restriction creates an information environment where significant underground discoveries could remain hidden from public knowledge for decades. Standard business practices, national security protocols, and diplomatic agreements all contribute to limiting disclosure of underground features that might fundamentally challenge conventional understanding of what exists beneath our feet. Indigenous knowledge systems preserve technical information about underground survival that predates written history by thousands of years. As someone who's worked with tribal consultants on construction projects affecting reservation lands, you understand that oral traditions often contain practical information about geological conditions, water sources, and structural stability that proves remarkably accurate when tested against modern surveying techniques. What corporate geologists have learned through expensive equipment and years of analysis, indigenous communities have known through generations of careful observation and practical experience. The Hopi accounts of the ant people include specific technical details that resonate with anyone who's designed systems for extended underground habitation. Food preservation techniques for multi-year storage without refrigeration. Water management protocols for recycling and conservation in sealed environments. Air circulation methods to prevent carbon dioxide buildup in confined spaces. Social organization strategies for maintaining group cohesion during prolonged isolation. These aren't abstract concepts, but practical solutions to engineering challenges that modern underground facilities still struggle to solve effectively. Mining industry executives have learned to take indigenous geological knowledge seriously because it consistently provides accurate information about subsurface conditions. Tribal accounts of underground water sources, mineral deposits, and geological instabilities have proven reliable enough that major extraction companies now routinely include indigenous consultation in their preliminary site assessment protocols. The success rate of these collaborations has convinced even skeptical engineers that traditional knowledge often preserves real geological intelligence. Similar patterns appear across cultures that had no contact with each other. Cherokee stories of the Moon-Eyed People describe pale beings who lived in underground communities beneath the Appalachian Mountains, emerging only at night because sunlight caused them discomfort. The technical details include descriptions of artificial lighting systems, ventilation networks, and construction techniques for stable underground architecture. These accounts mirror descriptions from cultures on different continents who describe similar underground dwellers with remarkably consistent characteristics. Zuni traditions speak of emerging from underground kivas into surface daylight, preserving detailed knowledge of subterranean living spaces that includes construction specifications for underground chambers. Mandan tribal histories describe ancestors who lived in subterranean villages until guided upward by spiritual intervention. Even Lakota accounts include references to people beneath the earth who occasionally surface to interact with those living above ground. The convergence of these traditions across geographic and cultural boundaries suggests something more than coincidental imagination. When construction techniques, environmental control methods, and social organization strategies appear consistently in oral traditions, from cultures separated by oceans and millennia, the possibility emerges that these accounts preserve fragments of actual historical experience rather than pure mythology. Corporate anthropologists working for extractive industries have documented dozens of similar accounts from indigenous communities worldwide. Australian Aboriginal Dreamtime stories include detailed descriptions of underground passages and chambers. African tribal traditions preserve knowledge of subterranean refuges used during environmental catastrophes. South American indigenous accounts describe vast tunnel systems beneath the Andes Mountains, some allegedly still accessible through hidden entrances. The technical consistency of these accounts becomes even more significant when analyzed through the perspective of practical engineering knowledge. Descriptions of ventilation systems that prevent toxic gas accumulation. Water filtration techniques that produce potable water from underground sources. Construction methods that maintain structural integrity in unstable underground environments. Food production systems that operate without access to surface agriculture. These aren't the kinds of technical details that emerge from pure imagination or symbolic storytelling. They reflect understanding of the practical challenges involved in underground living. Challenges that contemporary military planners and corporate engineers invest millions of dollars to solve. The indigenous accounts suggest that such solutions were developed and refined through generations of actual experience with extended subterranean habitation. Archaeological evidence supports some aspects of these traditions. The extensive underground cities of Cappadocia demonstrate that large populations lived underground for extended periods, developing sophisticated systems for air circulation, water management, and food storage. The Maltese hypogeum shows evidence of acoustic engineering and architectural planning that required advanced understanding of underground construction principles. Similar sites exist on every continent, suggesting that underground habitation represented a global pattern rather than isolated cultural anomalies. Intelligence analysts who study cultural preservation patterns note that societies typically maintain detailed technical knowledge only when it has practical applications for survival. The persistence of underground habitation knowledge in indigenous traditions worldwide suggests that such knowledge remained relevant to community survival long after initial development. Skills and information that communities considered important enough to preserve through careful oral transmission across centuries. The question that emerges from examining these convergent traditions isn't whether ancient peoples occasionally used underground spaces for shelter. Archaeological evidence clearly demonstrates that they did. The question is whether the scale, sophistication, and geographic distribution of underground knowledge suggests the existence of underground cultures that developed far beyond temporary survival applications. Modern technological capabilities have reached the point where detecting underground civilizations, if they exist, becomes theoretically possible through methods that didn't exist during earlier eras of exploration. Satellite-based ground-penetrating radar can identify subsurface structures from orbit. Seismic tomography creates three-dimensional images of underground formations using earthquake wave analysis. Gravitational anomaly detection reveals density variations that indicate hollow spaces or artificial structures beneath the surface. Yet despite these advanced detection capabilities, vast areas of Earth's subsurface remain unmapped and unexplored. Corporate research teams at companies like Halliburton and Schlumberger have developed underground imaging technology for oil and gas exploration that can create detailed pictures of subsurface geology to depths of several kilometers. These systems regularly identify features that don't match standard geological models: void spaces where solid rock should exist, regular geometric patterns that suggest artificial construction, electromagnetic anomalies that indicate metallic structures or electrical activity underground. Most of these discoveries get classified under proprietary research protocols, but the cumulative pattern suggests underground complexity far beyond conventional geological understanding. Military applications of subsurface detection technology have advanced even further beyond civilian capabilities. Defense contractors working on nuclear facility detection have created sensors that can identify underground construction through minute changes in electromagnetic fields, thermal signatures, and gravitational measurements. These systems, developed for monitoring potential adversary underground weapons facilities, inevitably detect other forms of underground activity. Much of this information remains classified, but declassified reports from earlier detection programs reveal consistent patterns of unexplained underground signatures. The convergence of evidence from multiple independent sources creates a compelling case for reconsidering conventional assumptions about what exists beneath Earth's surface. Ancient construction capabilities demonstrated by archaeological sites like Derinkuyu and the Hypogeum. Indigenous technical knowledge preserved through oral traditions worldwide. Modern corporate discoveries of underground anomalies during deep extraction projects. Military detection of unexplained subsurface activity through advanced sensing technology. Government classification of geological discoveries under national security protocols. Each category of evidence alone might be dismissed as insufficient for extraordinary conclusions. Archaeological sites could represent isolated historical achievements. Indigenous traditions might preserve symbolic rather than literal knowledge. Corporate anomalies might reflect natural geological processes not yet fully understood. Military detections might result from equipment limitations or interpretation errors. Government secrecy might protect conventional resources rather than extraordinary discoveries. But the convergence of these independent lines of evidence creates a different analytical framework. When archaeological, anthropological, corporate, military, and governmental sources all indicate underground complexity beyond conventional models, the probability that conventional models accurately describe subsurface reality begins to diminish. The accumulated weight of anomalous evidence reaches a threshold where alternative explanations deserve serious consideration. Your professional experience with large-scale construction projects provides perspective on how such convergent evidence should be evaluated. When multiple independent testing methods all indicate structural anomalies in a foundation survey, experienced engineers don't dismiss the findings as equipment errors. They recognize that consistent anomalies across different detection methods usually indicate real features that require investigation and explanation. The same analytical approach applies to subsurface anomalies detected through multiple independent methodologies. Recent advances in artificial intelligence and machine learning have created new possibilities for analyzing patterns in geological data that human analysts might miss. Corporate data analysis teams at companies like IBM and Microsoft have developed algorithms that can identify subtle correlations across vast databases of seismic readings, drilling reports, and satellite imagery. These systems consistently identify underground features that don't match conventional geological models, features that suggest organized structures rather than random natural formations. The economic implications of underground space utilization have begun attracting serious attention from strategic planning organizations. Think tanks associated with defense contractors and energy companies have produced classified analyses of underground resource potential and development scenarios. These studies examine the feasibility of large-scale underground industrial facilities, transportation networks, and residential complexes. The fact that such studies receive funding and resources indicates that underground development has moved beyond theoretical speculation into practical strategic consideration. International legal frameworks for underground territory rights remain largely undeveloped, creating obvious complications for any disclosure of extensive underground discoveries. Property law, environmental regulation, and international boundary agreements all assume essentially two-dimensional surface territories. Underground spaces that extend beyond surface ownership boundaries or that cross international borders present legal challenges that existing governmental and corporate systems are not equipped to handle effectively. The question emerging from this convergence of technological capability, accumulated evidence, and strategic consideration isn't whether underground anomalies exist. The evidence for underground complexity is overwhelming. The question is whether these anomalies represent natural geological processes that science hasn't yet explained, or artificial construction by intelligences that operate beyond current human detection and contact. As you sit in the growing quiet of evening, the accumulated weight of evidence settles around you like the familiar comfort of your favorite chair. The engineering reports, the corporate discoveries, the military classifications, the indigenous knowledge, all pointing toward possibilities that challenge fundamental assumptions about the planet beneath your feet. The ground that has supported every structure you've ever built, every foundation you've ever trusted, may be far more complex than any blueprint you've studied in your decades of professional experience. The implications extend beyond academic curiosity or speculative wonder. If advanced civilizations have indeed developed beneath Earth's surface, their choices about remaining hidden suggest wisdom about the complexities of surface-world contact. Perhaps they've observed the patterns of human history, the cycles of conflict, environmental destruction, and social upheaval, and concluded that isolation represents the optimal strategy for long-term survival and development. Your career has taught you the value of patient, methodical construction, building systems designed to last beyond your own lifetime, planning infrastructure that future generations will depend upon. The possibility of underground civilizations represents this same principle applied across geological timescales. Societies that measure their success not in quarterly profits or election cycles, but in millennia of sustainable development. Consider the strategic advantages of such an approach. Underground civilizations would be immune to surface weather catastrophes, climate change, and most forms of military conflict. They would have access to virtually unlimited geothermal energy, vast water resources, and mineral wealth beyond anything available to surface populations. They could develop technology and knowledge without the distractions of territorial competition, resource scarcity, or environmental degradation that have limited surface world advancement. The question of contact becomes more complex when viewed from this perspective. If underground civilizations possess technological capabilities and accumulated knowledge far beyond surface world achievements, what incentive would they have for revealing themselves? Direct contact might disrupt carefully balanced underground societies, create resource competition, or attract unwanted attention from surface world military and corporate interests. Perhaps the occasional anomalies, the unexplained seismic signatures, the drilling discoveries, the indigenous traditional knowledge, represent not accidental detection, but carefully managed glimpses. Information released in ways that allow surface world populations to gradually adjust to possibilities that might otherwise prove overwhelming. A patient introduction to concepts that challenge conventional understanding without creating social disruption or panic. Your engineering background provides perspective on how such gradual disclosure might work. Complex systems are typically introduced incrementally, with each component tested and integrated before adding additional capabilities. Revolutionary technologies are implemented through evolutionary steps that allow existing systems to adapt rather than requiring complete replacement. The same principles might apply to contact between surface and subsurface civilizations. The responsibility that comes with such knowledge feels familiar from your professional experience. When you discover structural problems during construction projects or encounter unexpected conditions that affect safety and planning, you have obligations to share that information with appropriate authorities. But you also understand the importance of presenting complex technical information in ways that stakeholders can understand and act upon constructively. Tonight, as the boundaries between day and night blur into contemplative darkness, you find yourself part of a much larger construction project. Not the buildings and infrastructure you've spent your career creating, but the gradual expansion of human awareness about the true nature of the planet we inhabit. Each piece of evidence, each technical discovery, each traditional account adds another element to a structure of understanding that may eventually connect surface and subsurface worlds. The silence around you feels different now. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of patient intelligence that has learned the value of careful observation and strategic timing. The ground beneath your house, beneath your community, beneath the civilization you've helped build through your professional contributions, may support far more than you ever imagined. Whether this possibility represents hope or caution depends on perspectives that extend beyond individual human lifetimes. Underground civilizations, if they exist, would understand patience in ways that surface world cultures have yet to develop. They would measure success in stability and sustainability rather than growth and expansion. They would value knowledge preservation over technological innovation for its own sake. The story of what lies beneath remains unwritten, unfinished, waiting in patient darkness. But you are no longer simply walking upon the earth. You are walking above it, aware that the foundations of everything you thought you knew may extend downward into mysteries that dwarf any construction project humanity has ever undertaken. In the quiet hours before sleep, that awareness transforms the familiar weight of your house, settling around you into something both comforting and profound. The unknown feels less like absence and more like presence. And in the deepest chambers of your experience and knowledge, you recognize that the most significant discoveries often wait not in distant reaches of space, but in familiar depths we have always taken for granted.